everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well. Today we are doing a good old-fashioned indie book review. The book we are reviewing is Price War by Richard Holliday. Price War is Richard's newest novel. It was released back in February and I had the joy of reading it as an ARC reader just before it came out. And really this review is coming out this much later purely down to my own lack of planning and timekeeping. So, the blurb for some context. In a future wrought by traumatic events, the people of the UK come to rely on retailer Yellowstone for their every need. The futuristic company is a newcomer to the country, but its technologically advanced ways pamper a wary populace with convenience at a price, and the convenience soon becomes a necessity. Danny Price is one of a lost generation who seems to be going nowhere in this harsh future. After losing most of his family, he moves in with his last remaining relative, his grandmother, who has her own secrets to keep. Others are wary that Yellowstone's ambition can't be controlled by the bounds of laws and morals. Their companies scrabble to secure their stake before it's too late. When Danny interviews at Yellowstone, he realises the sacrifice he needs to make is too great. But he doesn't realise that Yellowstone know all about him and the danger to their hegemony he poses without even knowing it. When the battle in the boardroom spills over to a hostile takeover of every town and city in the country, Danny is the one man who stands to fight the price war against all the odds. If Yellowstone feels familiar to you, it's very deliberate. Yellowstone is a Frankenstein tech company made up of equal parts Amazon, Google, Apple, and whoever else you feel like throwing into the mix. So let's start with a bit of a synopsis. Danny Price is in his mid-20s, he's struggling with the loss of his family and also the difficulty of finding a job. He gets approached by a futuristic tech company that seem to know his whereabouts just a little bit too much. This tech company is everything you imagine it to be. Think roll next Steve Jobs or autonomous vehicle Elon Musk, that kind of vibe. Lofty ambitions that often go way above the purpose of the company and of course cutthroat tactics. Automation that rids people of their jobs, tech that claims to have a soul, and a board of directors who will do literally anything to turn a profit. After a slightly unorthodox application process, Danny Price is actually offered a job at Yellowstone, alongside his friend Henry. Animosity between the two characters, even though they're best mates, starts pretty much straight away. Yellowstone has heaps and heaps of power, and Danny and Henry seem to sit at the opposite end of the scale as to how they react to this and how they feel about it. The things I enjoyed most about this book, I think thing one, is the portrayal of the teetering balance of power. What feels like a lifetime ago, I studied international relations at university, and that was a really big topic of conversation when I was at uni, all around this idea of non-governmental organisations, so companies like Amazon, Nike at the time, Microsoft, probably more Amazon and Google nowadays, these kinds of companies gaining loads and loads of power and often more wealth than nations. And what does that look like in a world that is made up of nations with borders and not companies who are borderless and also don't necessarily fall under a government for legislation and laws? Price War does a really good job of looking at that question and looking at these big companies and asking what happens when these companies do have more power than some governments. Richard manages to explore this really well whilst also keeping the feeling of the book actually quite light and entertaining. There's a particular passage that I remember that I won't read out because it will spoil things, where Richard really looks into the power play between Yellowstone and the actual UK government, and I really think that Richard nails the relationship here. It's honestly not too dissimilar if you've seen any of the videos out there of companies like TikTok sort of being interviewed, I suppose, or questioned by legal bodies and government departments, and the government just being so far behind in terms of tech that their legislation is just left reeling because they're just too far behind to catch up, and I think Richard really nails that. Another thing I really like about Price War are the interactions between characters. I think I said this about Richard's previous works, but one thing I really like that he does really well is the dialogue between characters. I think the dialogue, especially between Danny and his grandma, feels so organic and so natural that quite often you just kind of forget that you're reading a novel, which is always a nice feeling. Another thing that I really like in Price War is the portrayal of family and the different dimensions to that. In some ways the portrayal of family is quite traditional and almost at like a Romeo and Juliet kind of level of fraternising and sort of forbidden romance. And then on another level, almost like a macro of that example, is the idea of the two companies being families and just how much they differ in their values and their treatment of people. My favourite character in the book is Hayley, probably by quite a long way. I think she's a really cool representation of like a YouTuber, but also of the media in general, and how it can come in as an independent viewpoint. I think she's really interesting and quite multi-layered. The biggest beef I had with this novel was the ending, and this is almost entirely my fault. So I read an ARC, which came as an ebook, which is totally normal, and I did not clock at any point until quite literally the last 5 pages, if that, that this was the first in a series. So I was getting closer and closer to the end of the book, like, we're running out of pages, Richard, you're gonna have to answer some questions really, really quickly, and then they weren't answered. And then you get to the end of the book and you realise, this is book 1 in a series and it's the setup for the next novel, which makes a lot of sense. I sort of wish I'd gone into it knowing that, but that's purely down to me not clocking it until the last 5 pages. But seriously, overall, Price War is a really, really great book. If you're after something equal parts techno, thriller, dystopian future that is maybe knocking a little bit too close to where we are currently with companies such as Amazon, I definitely recommend Price War. Again, it's quite surprisingly light and entertaining, and at times almost quite funny, especially if you are, I think, British. It's got quite a British sense of humour, which, if you know Richard, you'll see that quite clearly. But given some of the subject matter and some of the discussions of like the balance of power and family and the role it plays, not just in the traditional sense of family, but also in the sense of a company, yeah, I really enjoyed it and I definitely recommend it. I will definitely be coming back for book 2, and I'm quite happy I'll be going into book 2 knowing that it's a series now. If you're after a thriller or a dystopian novel, I would definitely recommend Price War. You should also check out the rest of Richard's stuff. A lot of it's more sort of horror thriller leaning, but yeah, this is really, really fun. I definitely recommend it. I've put the links to it down below. This is not obviously sponsored or anything, but I did receive an ebook copy of this book for free. However, I purchased this with my own money, so I do recommend it, not sponsored. Go grab it, and let me know what you think. So that's my review of Price War by Richard Holliday. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do hit that like button and be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I will be back later on with another video. See you later.